Now I want to delve deeper into the world of animation and show you a very powerful and often overlooked Unity feature known as animation curves. And using this we can create all kinds of motion effects in our C# script files. Let me just press the play button on the toolbar and observe the motion of this cube in the scene. So I press play and you will see this cube starts to move. Notice that it doesn't just move forwards linearly, but it begins to move from side to side. Its motion goes on both axes at the same time. And if I press play again, notice that it doesn't zigzag sharply from left to right, but it seems to follow a curve here. So what I'm going to do is to demonstrate how we can create this kind of curved motion for objects straight from our script files. But not only that, we're going to be able to call upon an animation curve feature which will allow us to access a graph in the Object Inspector, and we'll be able to plot values on that graph to control the motion of this cube, and our C# script files will be able to interact with that graph to ensure that the cube moves correctly. So let's see how to go ahead and do that. So off screen I've gone ahead and cleared out this project completely so that now we're left with an empty project, and when I press the play button on the toolbar the cube doesn't animate at all. So we can start from scratch and begin to code in this motion for the cube. Now if I select the cube in the viewport and press F on the keyboard to frame it, you can see that the blue axis, the Z axis, is going to be the axis where the cube will move along. So it's going to be moving along the Z axis, moving forwards. But at the same time we also want it to move on the X axis. And the motion on the X-axis is going to be oscillation along a curve. As the cube moves forward, it's going to zigzag left and right along a curve. So what we want to do is to create a curve that is going to control the motion of the cube on the X-axis. So to do that, I'm going to create a new C# script file. Over here in the Asset panel, I'm going to right-click and choose Create and select C# script from the list, and I'm going to name this animation path and just press enter on the keyboard, and I'm going to open that in MonoDevelop by just double clicking the script file here, opening MonoDevelop, and here we have animationPath.C#, and as always it inherits from the class MonoBehavior. So now what I want to do is to add an animation curve property to our animation path class, so that we can use the Object Inspector to interactively create a curve that will control the motion of the cube in the X-axis. So let's just insert a new line here. I'm going to add the property public animation, and notice that in the code completion dialog here we have the option animation curve. So I'm going to select that option and make sure that this data type animation curve is set to public. Otherwise this variable will not be editable in the Object Inspector. So I'm going to choose public animation curve, and I'm going to call this curve X curve because it's going to control the motion of the cube in the X axis. So I'm going to press Ctrl S on the keyboard to save those changes and minimize MonoDevelop here and allow our code to compile. I've gone ahead and I've added the script here to the object. So if I select the cube object, you can see we have an animation path script object here in the Object Inspector. And notice straight away that we have this property here, X curve, which is used to control the curve here. So I can just click in this box, and when I do that, I get this curve editor dialog appear here in the Unity editor. And I have this graph where I can begin to build the curve to control the motion. So I have a number of presets here at the bottom, and I can just add those to the graph by clicking their thumbnails. So I've got a straight line here. This will move the cube in a straight line on the X-axis, a completely unchanging value. And I don't really want that. So I can select a different curve, have this linear one here. I can have a curve with a bend in it, so a quadratic equation curve here, and I can have all these other variations of curves, and I can even add my own points to the curve and completely customize it. I can select any point on the curve, right click with my mouse, and from the context menu choose the add key option, and straight away I get a new point added to the curve that I can click and drag and control, and I can also tweak the Bezier handles here to adjust the curvature of this curve. So I can just really have complete control of this. I can even come over here and add a new point and start to move this around. Now this curve has two axes. It has a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. You can see that horizontally this curve is charted between 0 and 1, and this horizontal axis is going to mark the total journey time of the cube. So at time 1 the cube will have reached its destination, and at time 0 the cube will be beginning its journey. And these do not represent second values, they're not seconds, but it's going to act as a scalar or a multiplier that we can apply to any total time that we choose. So if we set a travel time of 5 seconds, this 1 value here will stand in for 5 seconds, since 1 multiplied by 5 equals 5. And again, on the vertical axis we're charting between 0 and 1, and this represents the amount of translation that's going to be applied to the cube on the x-axis. So we're mapping translation to time, and we can even specify negative values for the translation here to deviate the position of the cube to the other side on the x-axis. But right now I'm just going to tweak these points here to create a kind of a wave to oscillate the cube to and fro. So here's another point. I'm going to add in another point, and to again create this kind of oscillation effect here, I'm just going to add in another point like so, and then perhaps one more point which I'm going to pull up here like this, and then I'm just going to grab this point here and move this down to the 0 position. Let's just move the cube down a bit further, down to 0 there. You can also notice how I'm just moving the whole curve by clicking on the curve itself, not on any particular point, and just clicking and dragging the mouse. You can move the whole curve there. So I'm going to accept these defaults here and just leave the curve as it is, and just close the curve editor. We can always come back in and click again and tweak that. And notice here in this X-curve property how we have a preview of the curve that we have built. Of course, if I go ahead and press play on the toolbar, you will see that the cube doesn't follow any path at all. This curve hasn't taken effect yet. We still need to add more code to our C# script file, and we're going to be doing that next.